Hey there, magical experimenters. Taylor Ellwood here, and it's a fine Sunday evening. So, if you're new to this channel, go ahead and click subscribe and click the notification bell. And if you're a tried and true person, then feel free to like and or comment because that helps. So, I thought I'd talk about tunnel vision because people get tunnel vision. I'm certainly guilty of it. What do I mean by tunnel vision? Well, I think when we look at our spiritual practices and our magical practices, we have to be willing to look at how we allow ourselves to get caught up in narrow perspectives on things. We get caught up in what we know. I had a phone call earlier today with somebody, and the person could tell I was upset about something, and they proceeded to make an assumption about me on the basis of what they thought they knew about me. They basically said, "You don't know what you really want, Taylor," is what they told me. And I was like, "Well, no, I do know. I mean, I do know what I want." And the person didn't really gather any details or anything else. They just made an assumption based off of what they thought they knew about me. It was a pretty upsetting experience, really, but it made me think about how, like in my own life, how I make assumptions about things. Like you go into a situation and you see what you want to see, or maybe what you think you see, or what you can be presumptuous. Certainly, and it can be very easy. I mean, and I think any and every person is guilty of it. I have some people who say, well, Taylor, you're so aware and all this other stuff. And I always say, well, but how do you think I got that awareness? It didn't come out of nowhere. It came out of failing and making mistakes and making presumptions and other things, and then being told like, well, this is what you're doing, dude. That and studying a lot of books on human psychology, because in general, I find that people are really puzzling, and I don't really understand most of them. I try, but I'm pretty hopeless at it. So it's something I struggle with a lot, actually. I guess it's one of the reasons why I'm quote unquote so aware and so open about things, because it's just like, well, if I don't understand most other people, at least I can maybe make it easier for them to understand me, and maybe that'll make things easier. I don't know. The problem with that, of course, is that it brings its own challenges. And, I've never been one to shy away from challenges, but sometimes these challenges get old. So think about, like, you think about blind spots. Like, what are your blind spots in your life? Your blind spots are the things that you aren't aware. And one of your biggest blind spots is the subjective perspective you bring to a situation, right? Because you're in your own head. You don't know how somebody else sees something. You don't know how a situation looks. Let's use an example here. Let's say you're out somewhere and you decide to be affectionate with somebody. Like, you hug them, or maybe you squeeze their shoulder or something else. But they're not. You could see it on your one hand as you're being affectionate. But another person's point of view could be, well, you're being something else. You're just playing, maybe you're being possessive. Maybe you're being other things. Like you can have something basically be parsed out in different ways. And what's interesting is that when you really examine it, you can see that a situation actually has multiple gradations where, I mean, very well could be, like, hey, you were being affectionate, but there was an element of possessiveness or something along those lines. So this is a good exercise to apply when you go out and you're interacting with other people. A question you might ask yourself is, what is the perspective that I'm bringing to the situation? And then you might ask yourself, how could the situation be interpreted from someone else's point of view? Of course, the challenge is you don't really know the other person's point of view, but if you can try to, as best as possible, put yourself in that person's moccasins or shoes or flip-flops or just their feet, you might discover a different perspective. You might be like, well, my perspective is this, but according to this other person with the same situation, it looks like this. So, do I really want to show up that way? Do I want to act that way? And this is what I mean about tunnel vision, because when you're in tunnel vision mode, which we all are, just one degree or another every day, it's very easy to get caught up in what you know or how you experience the world, which is a very subjective experience, versus how someone else experiences or thinks about the world. And I would say that neither person's point of view is invalid. Like, there are valid perspectives here. They may not necessarily be 100% true. I mean, one person could say, well, that person that's in a fight with the one person, like, that person's the assaulter, whereas it could be that person's actually defending themselves. It's a valid perspective to say, oh, well, these two people fighting, the one is the assaulter and the other isn't. But it may not, when you break it down, it may not be quite that, it may be something else altogether. And of course, each person has their own perspective. I think as magicians, this is a challenge that we have too in our magical practice, because we think we know, right? And we apply that to our situation, and we can allow it to really kind of blind us to the reality of the situation. And actually, so, like, let's say I'm doing magical work, and in the magical work that I'm doing, I'm shooting for a very specific outcome. What am I bringing to that magical working? I'm bringing my own perspective, my own limitations, my own thought process. And all of these things can play a role in how we experience and understand the world around us. On the other hand, someone else again can have a perfectly valid point of view. It may not be a true thing, and there's a difference between truth and validity. I want to mention that. Just because something is valid does not necessarily mean it's true. You can have a valid perspective on a situation and still not necessarily have it be true. There's a very real difference between validity and truth. The truth is kind of the holy grail of objectivity, which, let's just be honest here, is forever slipping out of our grasp, because I don't really think there is such a thing as objectivity. I mean, we can say there's an objective reality, but even that, we never really experience that objective reality, because we're always experiencing it subjectively as a result of our perceptions and our experiences and sensations that we receive. Oh, somebody might say, well, wait a minute, Taylor. I mean, that painting back there is green. Like, everyone will agree. That painting back there is green. Isn't that an objective reality? Well, yes and no. I mean, in a sense, I mean, that painting very well may be green to everybody out there. But what shade of green is it? What does it even mean? How much are we invested in being right, being objective, versus recognizing that we do have subjective experiences, and that those subjective experiences color the way we experience the world? These are the things that I like to think about sometimes, because I think that the tunnel vision that people get caught up in, and again, I'm fully guilty of this myself. I don't pretend otherwise. And maybe that's why people think I'm so freaking aware, because I'll at least be honest and admit it. But I mean, again, what is awareness? Such a troubled relationship with that word at this point. But I mean, it's a subjective experience. Like, let's just acknowledge that we're all living subjective lives. I mean, and I don't know why does that have to come with the label of awareness? Why do we have to? I think what it comes down to, I've been thinking about this word awareness a lot, because I've had different people tell me how aware I am, and I question that because I think that when somebody really gets to know me, they discover how not aware I am. Like you guys see me in these videos, or you read my blog posts, and I don't know, it's a filtered perspective. Like you don't really know me. You know of me. You don't know me. You may learn certain things about you. You may feel a sense of intimate connection with me, and it may be easier to talk with me as a result. I don't know, but do you really know me? I can say that that kind of plays into this because like we have this tunnel vision of who people are, what we know about them, what our spiritual experiences are, what we know about those, all these other things, and we get caught up in what we think we know. But what we think we know is an illusion. It's a trap, to quote Admiral Akbar from Star Wars, right? Not everything you know is true. Not everything, and not every experience you have or perception of experience is automatically true. I mean, it could be valid. You could say, oh, I watch these videos with Taylor, and I know him, and that could be a valid perspective. I mean, you might come up, maybe we run into each other at a conference, or you run into me on the street and you start talking to me and you're like, hey, yeah, you did da da da, and I might speak to that, and there might be a sense of knowing, but do you really know me? you know and this is where I think it's useful to explore this as an exercise, this whole tunnel vision, because the perspectives that we bring to a given situation or a given person or anything else like that are ultimately limited perspectives. They're valid, but they may not be entirely true. It is very easy to get caught up in our own narratives about what we ourselves are doing or what someone else is doing. I mean, I could say to you, like, okay, that person over there is doing X, and that person over there is doing Y. But how do I really know? It's my perspective, it's a limitation. And this is something that I think if you can cultivate that awareness around it, it helps you become a better magician and a better person, because then maybe you start to not take yourself so seriously. And I'll admit, for sake of transparency here, which I don't know, I don't know how aware this makes me be, but I'll admit that in some ways like this really hits home for me sometimes. Like, sometimes I'm like, yeah, this is my perspective and this is the other person's perspective. And then I'm like, oh, I can relate to this person, or oh, I see something about the situation I didn't see before, and now I have to look at my actions in a different light, or my words. But I think we should question very carefully the perspectives that we ourselves have and the perspectives that other people apply to us. Having somebody tell me, for example, today that I don't know myself. Well, really, how presumptuous to say that. How arrogant in a way. You don't know yourself. You don't know what you want. Well, I think I do know what I want. I think I have a pretty good idea of what I want. I may not always be good at going about getting it. And sometimes I get in my own way. And sometimes I trip myself up. And sometimes just, I'm me, like anyone else. And I have my failings and my flaws and all the other things that come with it. But that doesn't mean it doesn't mean that someone can come along and say, well, you don't know yourself. Like, well, what? I do know myself. I know my failings and flaws. I know my challenges. I know the things I struggle with, because those are things that I deal with on an everyday basis. And it's kind of the same thing like for yourself. Like, what are the challenges that you have? What are the struggles? And what assumptions are other people making about you where, they think they know you, but they don't? Or maybe they know you, but what they know of you is still filtered through their own perspective. I mean, At the end of the day, can you ever truly know somebody else? You can know what you experience about them. You can know what you perceive about them. You can know what you take in subjectively about them. But your subjective reality isn't the same as theirs. So it's a tunnel vision. It's the same thing with magical work. It's the same thing with anything else. I had on one of my older videos, how to work with demons. I had this person ask me like, how do demons communicate with you like verbally? Like, can you hear them verbally, auditorially, basically, versus in your head? And I said, I was candid. I'm like, well, no, like my interactions with demons, it's very much, I hear them in my mind. It's a spiritual transmission. He's like, well, how do you know for sure that it's not just your own thoughts? The answer is that I don't know, not for sure. I mean, for all I know, I'm deluding myself. It could be. What I think tells me that is that the experience of the demon feels different from the normal experience that I have. And in the end, I told the person, I'm like, look, you just have to do the work yourself. Like, I can answer your questions and I can tell you what to do and I can tell you my experiences. But at the end of the day, you have to do the work and have your own experiences. And that's kind of the challenge. But then at the same time, you have to apply critical awareness to what you do. You have to be willing to examine and critique and explore, which is not always easy to do because it is very easy to get tunnel visioned about what we think we know and everything else. I mean, this is why it can be useful to have another perspective in the mix. But even that other perspective is still ultimately limited by their own subjectivity, by their own experiences, by the baggage they bring, by the assumptions they make. And as objective as we can try to be, objectivity is a very it's a very problematic rail, I find, when it comes to magical work and really life in general, because it's like, well, how do you really assure that you even have an objective experience? Let's say you say, okay, well, Taylor, I'll get 10 people to have the same experience. And based on what they say and share, that'll tell us. Or I'll repeat the experiment over and over again to see what happens. And, if I see that this is continually happening every single time, then there's got to be some truth to it. Well, yes and no. There may be some truth. There may not be. Truth, you can have 10 people agree on something, but there'll still be differences in details. Like, let's say you see a car accident, right? This is a great example, a car accident. I guess they don't call them car accidents anymore because really they're not accidents per se, but whatever. We're going to go with the nomenclature of car accident. If I have a car accident, right, and I have different people observe that, I mean, they're all going to have their own perspective. And there may be points of consensual agreement, of consensual reality where we start to get objectivity. But there's also going to be points of disagreement or things that don't quite line up or other things. It's just my experience because I've witnessed a few and I've been in a couple. What we think we know often becomes the limitations that bind us from discovering what we could learn. And what we know becomes its own limitation and its own tricky aspects, shall we say, of magical work. So don't assume that you know anything. Challenge what you know to discover what you can learn, right? Very simple. Challenge what you know to discover what you can learn. But a lot of people will sometimes struggle with that. I think everyone struggles with it, actually. I struggle with it. And I'm somebody who says, challenge what you know to discover what you can learn, but I still struggle with it sometimes. I mean, it's just a human condition. I think one of the things that I'm learning not to be as hard on myself as I used to be, because I'm recognizing how subjective my experiences are and how at a certain point it could be easier to beat myself up, but what does that really get me other than feeling rotten about myself? I was beating myself up earlier today over some things, and I don't know, it didn't really get me very far. just kind of made me, it ended up making me feel alone, really more than anything. And I ended up making myself be alone. So challenging what you know, in terms of a tunnel vision, it involves challenging your perspective on things, challenging your blind spots, challenging your tunnel vision, recognizing your subjectivity. And folks, let's toss that word awareness out. Like, please, any of you who like watch these videos or read my stuff, stop telling me how freaking aware I am. I'm so sick and tired of it. I'm honest with you. I'm transparent with you. It doesn't make me aware. It just makes me somebody who's willing to be unfiltered with you and let you in a way most other people don't. It doesn't make me aware. Awareness is such a, it's such a pedestal to put somebody on, because when you really discover that person and you discover how not aware they are, you you begin to recognize and realize that, like, well, shoot, this person who seems so aware really isn't. Well, no, I mean, I'm honest and transparent with you. Like, I'll admit my foibles and follies and failures and all that good stuff, because I just don't have any. I don't know, because I feel no. I don't have a filter in a lot of ways. Like, and I actually think it's a good thing most of the time, because I think people filter themselves out so carefully. They get so caught up in their own image, their own status, how they appear. How do I look a certain way? And I just don't care as much. Sometimes it's good to care. In certain circumstances, it's good to care and to show a modicum of consideration for other people around you. Sure. But how often do we let that also limit ourselves from being genuine with ourselves? So I'm very unfiltered, and I don't know. Does if that makes me more aware? I don't think it does. I think it just makes me honest with myself, honest with other people. Well, this is the way I am. This is what I'm feeling. This is what I'm discovering. And I would say the same to you. Try being unfiltered for a bit. Try seeing what it's like to maybe not watch everything you say or do, or and still keep in mind that you want to show some modicum of awareness, I suppose, or recognition, right? But like, at the same time, like, don't be afraid to just challenge what you know. And maybe challenging what you know is being unfiltered, being able to own up to stuff. Like, I get people who tell me, like, you're the only one who talks about your failures, or you're one of the few people who talks about your failures in magic regularly, or other things, or like your own follies and fallibilities. And I'm like, well, yeah, why not? I mean, I'm a human being. We're all human beings. We make mistakes. We fuck up. We screw things up. It's just a human normal thing to do. Why is there so much emphasis on not admitting that and acknowledging it and taking responsibility? I don't know. We live in such an image conscious society, but like, that becomes its own tunnel vision. It becomes its own blind spot. It limits you. It challenges you. It takes away from the integrity of your experience. So those are my thoughts, and I don't know, that if you think that makes me more aware, then have at it, have fun with that. I don't think it does. I just think that I'm just less willing to play games, and most of the time it works for me, and sometimes it doesn't, and it brings its own challenges, and it's life. As Frank Sinatra sang, "That's life." And I mean, I like the rest of the song, but I'm not going to sing it to you. But watch the Joker movie. I mean, the Joker's a great example of someone who initially is terribly filtered in a lot of ways, and then by the end of the movie, he's unfiltered, for better or worse. I mean, he's the Joker after all. But you know, it's kind of interesting, because then he unfilters society, and oh, look at that, things change. So be aware of your tunnel visions. Be aware of how you're limiting yourself. Challenge those limitations as best you can. Get some other perspectives. Look at things differently. And, well, See what happens. Discover for yourself. I don't know what else to tell you guys, but do the best you can. I know I certainly am. All right. See you in another video.